You're listening in on an animated discussion about Batman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today we'll be discussing Season 2, Episode 13, Showdown.
Okay, Caleb, I'm jumping in here right away. I don't want us to start talking about anything in this episode until we have talked about this title card. No previews of what we're going to talk about. Just right to this title card because I love it.
Oh, you do. You love it.
I do love it.
I don't think I love it. Is it effective? Does it get the point across? Yes. But it's so simple.
This is an interesting tactic that you've started taking where complexity matters a lot to you.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
No, I'm interested. I'm interested in this. That this is sort of a new thing that I'm hearing for you, that complexity is important. And I sort of expected to hear that, actually. It's in my notes. I'm ready to talk to you about the lack of complexity.
Caleb is going to dog how simple this is. So, okay, here's the thing. I think at the end of the day, the way we've talked about title cards in the show, to your point, complexity is not the way we grade these. Like, there's probably some complex ones we've looked at that are trash, and there's some simple ones that are fantastic. So I'm not saying this is a trash title card because it does get the point across.
Yeah,
Old West, glowing red light. So there's gonna be bloodshed, probably, presumably, maybe something. I even thought supernatural-ish.
Yeah,
maybe, you know. So on point there. There's no Batman because basically Batman's not in the episode.
Batman is essentially absent.
But I just get the thing. It's like one of those. Well, I could draw that, and I'm not even an artist. That's a little arrogant. That's a little arrogant. I'm saying like
no.
The idea, the base idea is so simple that I'm like, wow. I guess a couple of things.
Yeah, here's the trick. Here's the trick where I feel like this diverges because I get you, and I'm just. This is not shade when I say this is a new thing. I'm just really interested in the evolution of us talking about these title cards. And all of a sudden, complexity is like a big deal for you. And I think that the reason it is less so for me is, first of all, you're looking at Batman the Animated Series, which is, as a whole, predicated very seriously on the most trimmed down, streamlined style possible in the actual animation. Like, if you get the coffee table book that talks about the art of the thing, they come right out and say, we wanted this to be as simple and streamlined as possible. And it's sort of, birthed 1,000 ships, right? Like we get Superman the Animated Series and then 1 million characters in Justice League and Justice League.
Well, so much they actually, when they did the redesign, they made it even simpler.
It did. Yeah, this is true. It gets even simpler. But here we are still in the thick of BTAS, and the title cards are typically by far the most visually complex thing in any given episode. Even just the fact if you give it a very airbrushed feel to get that noir thing across,
no, it does.
It's already way more complex than anything else in the show.
It's much different. That's a fact. It's those images are always the most artistically different than everything we've seen.
Yes, and they vary themselves. Like within themselves, they vary a whole lot depending on the episode. So they vary from the style of the show. They vary from each other all over the place. So complexity is a really interesting approach that I'm interested in your take on. At the same time, in this case, I'm really impressed by the simplicity of Showdown because there's a lot going on in this episode. None of it has to do with Batman, almost. And all of it is a Western. And if you want people to realize that that's what they're getting into so that they don't feel sort of bait and switched by the fact that Batman's barely in this episode, it's going to be a Western, get it across as quickly as possible. So yeah, high noon, sunlight, the saloon doors, the font is very sort of Old West.
The music.
Yeah. So it reminds me, in that respect, I like that they scaled back any level of complexity in the title card to get across the point that you're going to have a Western in this episode of BTAS, even if you have no idea what that actually means until you watch it.
Right. And this reminds me a lot of Fires of Olympus, for example, was another one we talked about. Now, This one I think is probably a little more necessary because, again, this is a totally different subgenre. We're not even noir anymore. This is straight up a Western. Western steampunk action story.
It's not even the most noir of Westerns, which like the spaghetti Western. It's not even that. It's a pretty straightforward steampunk adventure western. Interesting series of choices.
Very interesting series of choices that I love, and we'll get into that in a second. We're going to keep talking about this because I know we have a couple of, or at least one upcoming episode that I also feel is relatively simple, but is incredibly effective. So, you don't have to like paint the Mona Lisa every time you do one of these.
Sure.
And to be fair, I don't think that it needs to be complex per se. The problem is, whenever you have those that are really stand out, that are at such a high level, and then you're like, okay, but this one's just some like old saloon doors, that just feels not as impressive.
If this were a show that were a Western all the time, it would be way too little. But this is the part that I like, is that we, the creators said to themselves, have to get across that this is a Western episode of Batman.
From the get-go.
Right away. Why would we overcomplicate it, right? Like, I'm surprised we didn't have a wagon wheel in it. You know why we didn't have a 6-shooter? Because they totally would have been shut down by the censors for that. I can't believe how many actual guns are shot on Batman the Animated Series, but we've talked about that already. But there's no way they put that, in the title card. Like, we go right for it. And since we will discuss this more, you might say, should we have not got Jonah Hex into this? Nobody knew who the hell Jonah Hex was.
Nobody knew who Jonah. In fact, this is actually probably my very first encounter with Jonah Hex. Like,
I would not be
whenever
surprised.
I watched this, I saw this episode the first time. I'm pretty confident this is the first. Because I remember even when I watched it as a kid or a teenager when it was being re-aired, I was like, this is a weird episode. But I did remember this episode. There are some of these episodes that I'm a little foggy on. This one,
it stands out because it's so weird.
It is so strange. And Jonah Hex is such a dynamic character. I did not remember the twist. I couldn't remember exactly what the specific ends was. So as I was rewatching, I was like, this is familiar. I know I should know who the kidnapped victim was, but I can't remember. But I remembered him hiding in the dirt. I remember that. I remember the whole like big battle on the blimp, like all that stuff.
Right.
It really stuck out my mind. And I think that just goes to show that this is a really outstanding episode.
It really is. Yeah. So to put the title card fully to bed, I agree with you that it is not complex, and in fact goes for some of the easiest possible Western iconography. It really does. But because this is a Batman show, I feel like simplicity is the right choice.
Sure.
Trying to get Jonah Hex in there, trying to get an airship into that title card.
It would be confusing.
Before steampunk is a thing. Because let's remember how old this episode is.
I mean, mid-90s, steampunk was definitely not a mainstream. I mean, it's still not a mainstream.
I'm not saying nobody said the word steampunk before this, because probably they did. But let's say I was in a position to have heard this word and had not heard this word when I saw this episode as a kid, like when it first ran. So bottom line, I agree with you. It's not complex. For my money, that's a win.
All right. I don't have strong feelings either way. I just, my initial gut was like, this is a really simple way to do it. But to your point, this is breaking. Firstly, there's no Batman hardly in the episode.
Yeah.
We're featuring a totally different character in the Old West, and there's steampunk. So to your point, they had to make it simple. I think you're spot on. I just was left wanting a little more, but maybe that's because they've just set such a high bar in previous episodes.
Yeah,
but
I can see
to
that.
put it into context of the time, though, no one's going to know any of that other stuff.
Nobody's going to know.
So,
and I'll say, if this were a title card for an episode of Gunsmoke, you'd be 100% right. Like it's too little.
Right.
But for here, it's like sweet spot.
Sweet spot. All right. Yeah, I can roll with that.
So let's talk about the bumpers. Right, like which is how they're so short. That's kind of how I'm describing them. The Batman bumpers.
Yes, the Batman bookends, the bumpers where Batman, Ra's al Ghul is breaking into the
to an old folks
home, yeah, which is kind of strange. And you see him kidnap this old guy. You don't get to see the face, and then he leaves a tape for Batman to say, "Yo, I know you want to fight me because." Of course, you are the world's greatest detective.
Right,
you knew it was going to be me.
We know how this works, the two of us.
Yes, we've been doing this for a while now. But seriously, don't chase me. It's not worth your time.
And then explains how. Like, has the respect for Batman to explain why this is a personal matter, so to speak. So I want to put a pin in a couple of things from the very beginning, because I love this episode. And by the end, though, I start to see kind of the cracks in the armor of how they treat Batman and Ra's as nemesis. Okay. Correct. So I want to put a pin in a couple of things. One is I know this is a kid show. You don't think about this stuff all the time, but you dropped a whole bunch of knockout gas into an old folks home.
Yeah.
Let's discuss the hundreds of incidental murders
That probably just happened.
That just happened.
Yes.
Like a whole bunch of people that were living in the rest home did not survive the gas attack. I am bringing a little bit of realism to Batman the Animated Series, but still I'm just pointing out.
Well, to say that was a victimless crime would be inaccurate.
Not to mention, I mean, you've got people who need meds, and now you've got people that are unconscious. Like it's a whole thing. When ostensibly we're talking about Ra's al Ghul, he's got access to a vast criminal network. Make some fake identification, make some fake paperwork, send somebody in the front door to get the guy and walk right back out. Like, I'm checking him out. I'm his long lost grandson and I'm checking him out. I know that doesn't make for an exciting episode of Batman the Animated Series. And normally I would care 0%. Go for the most action-packed part. But when we get to the end and we talk about them as nemeses, I'm going to circle back to this because I don't love it.
I mean, Batman. Yeah, we'll circle back to it.
No, let's do it. You know what?
Batman
We're going to
just
spend all of this time talking about Jonah Hex. Let's talk about the bumpers.
Sure, because Batman basically says, "Oh, this is a personal matter. You were just coming to reclaim your son,
Right.
So you're good to go." And I was like, "Dude, he's an eco-terrorist who's gonna go do more awful things."
There's a bigger picture, right?
Right.
There's a bigger picture to Ra's, aside from the fact that they're forcing us to think about this because they're doing this nemesis thing. And
Right.
I'm like, what about all the people you just accidentally killed?
Right.
And then, there's this bigger picture where it's like, but if I let him go now, it's a friggin' orbital space laser tomorrow.
Exactly.
And
it's not as if he hasn't committed any crimes recently anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it just
probably several dozen international crimes before breakfast that day.
Oh, correct.
Just incidentally. So the thing that bothers me here is that I really like the idea of these two incredibly competent and able men looking at each other as nemeses.
Right.
I have respect for your capability, and our enmity is of a rarefied air. I am not a mugger that you're punching on the street corner. You are not some, random Interpol goon that I'm just having shot from a mile away by a sniper rifle. We're operating on a different level. I really like all that for Batman and Ra's. It just gets a little problematic sometimes. And in this case, I feel like this episode, which is otherwise great, and I don't want to take away from the episode, I'm saying they made me think about this. It falls apart a little bit because there's a bigger picture that they have set up, partly within all of their interactions, but also in this episode.
I mean, if Batman saw the Joker in the grocery store, don't you think he would, try to stop him?
Exactly.
Even if he was theoretically not committing any crimes at that moment,
Well, in fact, Caleb, we will look at exactly that situation in our next episode. Mm-hmm. So I guess I just wanted a cleaner way to get to that nemesis, slow nod, turn and go your opposite ways situation. I just wanted it to be cleaner, I guess.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think it's a fair criticism. It's it's just a little bit of a suspension of disbelief, Joshua. And
normally I'm a number one proponent for that.
Yes, and I'm willing to roll with it because it's not the point of the episode. Really, it's more like a way for them to get to the story they're really wanting to tell. So
this is another thing actually we'll talk about over the course of our next couple episodes. But I'm starting to see that when they want to do continuity on purpose, they're bad at it. When Batman the Animated Series specifically sets out to do something that makes use of their own continuity in any way other than just, sort of referencing the details, they're amazing at referencing the details.
Right.
But whenever they want to do something that really trades on their own continuity, they're not very good at it.
They get better throughout the DCAU for sure. But yeah.
That's 100% true.
But in Batman the Animated Series, yes, I think you are correct. It is not something they're awesome about, or they... It's really hard because when they do acknowledge those details, that you're like, oh, okay, so that you're going to bring up the whole story, right? No, they don't. It's like,
no, they don't. We don't talk about orbital lasers or the lying to his daughter or being left in the desert or the fact that he's done 9 international crimes before breakfast.
Yes.
I mean, we don't deal with any of that. And it's like, but you kind of want us to.
Like, you want us to remember this one specific thing, but not all the other stuff. So it's a little strange.
It's tough.
And I think part of this is just the way television has changed so much since Batman the Animated Series. You got to think sitcoms were a thing at the time. That was what was popular.
Right, big reset button every
episode. And today everything is just so much more serialized. That thing that happened 3 seasons ago is a big deal. I mean, we're watching the final season of Game of Thrones right now, and like they're literally bringing back previously on from the first episode. You're like, what? So
yeah,
I mean, that's just the world we live in today versus the mid 90s.
But we'll also put a pin in this because, again, a couple episodes from now, we're going to talk seriously about a place where I can, because I know where the show goes, I can tell what they're doing, and it's not good. It's like it doesn't work. And I feel like this is less not good and doesn't work and more just clunky, and I want it to be cleaner.
I do want to throw one other thing out there, and this is going to just acknowledging a trend that we've seen among the last several batch of episodes we've seen, right?
Absolutely.
So we've discussed in the last few weeks that it seems kind of like we're like this is technically at the time it's now season 2, but it would have been season 3. They've probably done about 50 plus of these episodes then, and you're starting to feel like, okay, we had an Alfred featured episode, and the next episode is
Baby Doll was super weird,
and,
cul-de-sac,
and now we're getting an episode featuring Jonah Hex. So there's a couple of trends that we're going to talk about in the next couple episodes, but I do think it's really interesting that one trend I've seen lately is, all right, we feel like we've been to the Batman well, we've been to the Robin well, we've introduced all the key villains, we've invented a couple. So what do we do now? Well, let's just focus on like C-list plot lines that you never knew you really wanted to hear about. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. This one is fantastic.
It really is.
But it strikes me as a point where they were struggling creatively to come up with more air quotes Batman stories that we will turn around in the next couple of episodes, but it's interesting.
I agree with you. I think that that's one of our, and more your honestly than mine, best insights into the way this show was put together as we've been going through it. They're not even necessarily doing bad work. It just feels like they're struggling for Batman stuff a little bit. And we've seen it the last couple episodes. We'll see it for at least 2 or 3 more.
Well, and this makes me also think too, and this requires a little more research on my end, so I'd love to do a little more reading up on this. But this is probably about the time they're like, all right, so we've done Batman. I mean, we're still doing Batman because it's still performing well on TV. But so Superman, what about that? That's a new character, new stories. I would be
interested if they're in development for that right now.
I think so.
Like somebody's contacting them, and they're a small squad that's now having to split their attention, right? Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, you've got a research question.
Yeah, because there is a big break in between BTAS original run. I think it's like 1 to 2 years before we get the new adventures, but that's also the same time Superman has started airing. Yeah. So
okay, you've got a research question. You have homework.
I'm going to do some digging. I'm going to put Paul Dinn on the phone right now.
Okay, but enough about that. We've got to go back in time to 1883.
Yippee-ki-yay.
Okay, so this flashback from Raish. First of all, I love being reminded that Raish has been at it for a while.
A long time.
Yeah.
I love his scheme too, by the way. I know it takes us a second to get there in the flashback, but I thought it was hilarious. He's like, we're going to attack Washington, D.C. and take over America. Just like kind of he was basically twirling his mustache. It was fantastic.
There is something in the setup that I thought was just absolutely like a revolutionary statement to come out, even the mouth of a villain, but in a mid-90s children's cartoon show. When Raish frames this situation, I quote, "Your government was ruthlessly expanding westward."
Yes.
Okay, 100% accurate.
Yes.
And I like this setting
touching on some imperialism there, am I right?
Absolutely. And I like this trend of setting up Raish in this episode as a more principled villain. But don't forget, he's a more principled villain because at the end of the day, Master of America.
Master of America.
Man.
Or let's go back to an earlier episode. Yes, I'm here to protect the environment by destroying the planet first.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's it. It's he doesn't allow his workers to be exploited like slaves.
It's so weird, right? So this is the guy wants to take over America and basically be king of America. But then when Duvall is whipping the people, he says, no. This is not how I do work.
This is not how I do things, right? Yeah. I feel like even your average mask-wearing League of Shadows member gets Raish's respect. Like, they commit their lives to this cause. They will be used as pawns, but they will be respected members of my organization along the way. And also, let's be honest, look what these people are doing. They are skilled workers. And when he says, like, good men are difficult to find, men who can do this work are difficult to find out here, I like Raish's principled, pragmatic approach, but I also think I believe him. This isn't how he usually does things.
So what you're saying is, if you were going to work in an organization, some sort of villainous organization, Ra's al Ghul, he's got benefits, He doesn't do beatings. I'm sure they're all well fed. They get badass suits of armor, apparently.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I think he's the right.
He's got a great villain organization.
Right. If I have to work for a villainous organization, League of Shadows seems to be the way to go.
I'm writing at my resume right now.
Yeah. So but I'm just saying, I believe him. I believe him when he says this is not the way I do things, and is very upset about it. And is, interestingly enough, if you don't realize the twist, I kind of remembered the twist, but I was still in that moment going, boy, he's given that guy a lot of rope. He's given Duvall a lot of rope.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Because anybody who wasn't Raish's son, as we find out later, would be thrown into the fires.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's it. Why are you even here?
Yeah, so I was rewatching it, and I kept thinking, I'm like, there's no way it's Jonah Hex, but I was like, but who? I was like, would it be Duvall? Which was where I was heading to, but I'm like, yeah, but to Batman's and I think Robin's point, yeah, he'd be over 100 years old. I'd forgotten the key piece that he was Raish's son and had been through a Lazarus pit.
Yeah, as a much younger man, right? Yeah. So those effects last, right?
Apparently.
Also, props to my son. Hi, Elijah. As he was watching it with me, he says, "Is the guy in the wheelchair Jonah Hex?" And I was like, "No, but good thinking." Because that's a completely reasonable guess. Like, look at how Raish in this episode is treating Batman as a worthy opponent. And as we watch this, Jonah Hex is a unexpectedly worthy opponent.
Dude, he's
as far
crazy.
As
like some of the maneuvers he's pulling in this episode are nuts. Like how he jumps out of the blimp as it's passing through the mountain, doing like backflip, like a dive roll and stuff. I was like, whoa, this is great.
Okay, should we talk about Jonah Hex a little bit?
Absolutely, Joshua. So I'll talk a little bit about his appearances in the media, but I would love to get the comic book background first.
So he's been around for a minute, but not as long as some of the other characters who have appeared in Batman the Animated Series. His first appearance was All-Star Western number 10 in 1972.
70s, all right.
Yeah. There was a bit of a resurgence of non-superhero genre work in comics. You started to see comic book shops actually were becoming a thing. So you could get your product directly to people who would be interested in it, right? So for instance, when you're just on a spinner rack and I've got my options are, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Captain America, and a Western comic, the kids that are buying off a spinner rack at the grocery store are going to skip that Western comic. It's probably not going to work out. They're going to grab one of the superheroes. If you can send a relatively or comparatively limited print run to your comic book shop, you can move some Western comics, especially if you do weird Western comics, which is a lot of what Jonah Hex did. Now, not to be pedantic about it, but I'll ask you, Caleb, are you familiar with the genre, the weird Western?
I vaguely. I don't know enough about it. I know that it usually is Western with some sort of supernatural flair.
That's exactly it.
That's about all I got. I'm not super familiar with what all the genre entails, specific what the rules are. But I think of like Wild Wild West, or I think of more recently. Well, I don't want to overplay my hand on the alternate media recommendations.
Right.
There are some more recent weird Westerns I like as well.
You largely have the right of it. It's basically a Western with supernatural, or more specifically, usually horror elements.
Yes.
Right? Like thrown on top.
Right.
You also have steampunk, which is a little bit more like it's not just Western. It's in fact usually more Victorian. We'll talk about that in a minute.
It's like Victorian fantasy a little bit.
Victorian sci-fi.
Sci-fi.
Right? Like science fiction elements in a Victorian setting. And technically, looking at the calendar, the Old West is a Victorian era setting, even though you don't get very much cultural overlap, or the types that you do are very, very specific and not the area of expertise for this particular podcast. But so that's weird Western is the supernatural and horror, but in the West.
Right.
Okay. And that was a lot, but not all, of what Jonah Hex did. Western stories where he was a brutal ex-Confederate bounty hunter who was not welcome anywhere he went, for both because he was hideously scarred and also because he was on the losing side of the Civil War, but also because wherever he went, weird stuff was happening and he was going to put a stop to it and probably make a bounty on the way. So that's all I really want to say about Jonah Hex, except for pointing out one interesting thing for this episode. Most everybody coming to this episode did not know who Jonah Hex was, and yet they chose to do a too old for this stuff version of Jonah Hex. This is a Jonah Hex that is somewhat past his prime. He's balding. He's already hideously scarred, but they make a big point about how old he is. Other people mention it.
He looks very old.
Yeah, he's he even says himself, I'm getting too old for this, you know? And so that's just an interesting choice as far as I was concerned, having known who Jonah Hex was, that they would do this kind of past his prime version. Interesting
choice. You're going to show Jonah Hex not like how he was in his heyday, but when he is at the very end of his career, essentially.
And still able to go toe-to-toe with Raish's organization.
Still able to have a sword fight with a knife.
Oh, yeah, that's a thing. So that's Jonah Hex in terms of this episode. It's not bad choices. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. It's just like, I feel like they did it for a really specific reason, but I also can't suss out what that specific reason needed to be, you know?
Yeah, so Jonah Hex here, so in this episode, he's voiced by Bill McKinney, who is most popular for being the crazy mountain man from Deliverance. So,
well, it's a good poll.
Right. So this is the first, I believe, of just 2 appearances of Jonah Hex in the DCAU. The second one, which we will get to at some point in the future,
it's some of my favorite episodes.
I love it. It's one of my favorite 2-parters in all of the DCAU. I love it so much. It's the Once and Future Thing Part 1. So we'll get to that another date, but just know that it's a real treat. It's a real treat for DC fans. And then he also makes an appearance in Batman Brave and the Bold, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, I really like he has several appearances there, working as a plucked from time bounty hunter for Mongol, getting people to fight on War World. It's delightful.
That sounds fantastic.
There's also, just because I love it so much, I'm going to mention it. There's also a sort of before the credits scene team up with Batman where they fight the Old West version of the Royal Flush Gang.
Yes. Oh my God. That's fantastic.
Yeah, he's a really interesting, great character who is so good for just like, oh, do we need to go back in time to the Old West? We have some characters. Jonah Hex is one of the more recognizable ones that DC has.
One other thing I want to mention is that there was, of course, the ill-fated 2010 Jonah Hex movie.
A film that I would describe as a series of choices.
Okay, yes, sorry. Yes, that's the way to put it. So it is an ill-fated movie. A series of choices is a way to put it. Because here's the thing that's really sad about this Jonah Hex movie, is it felt ridiculously rushed. It didn't know what it wanted to be. And here's the bummer. This cast. Listen to this cast, man. It could have been amazing. Josh Brolin, of course, as Jonah Hex, which I actually think is a good choice.
Very good casting.
John Malkovich as Quentin Turnbull, so the bad guy. John Malkovich is great at playing bad guys. And we got Megan Fox. Okay, well, that was her prime time.
Right.
You know, whatever.
And look, she could have been... Well, I feel like Megan Fox is a casualty of what you're saying about the movie where it didn't know what it wanted to be.
Yeah, yes, correct. And I actually think Megan Fox, she's got some acting chops. She just never quite gets the opportunity. And this movie certainly did not do her any favors.
Did not give her that opportunity.
Michael Fassbender, Will Arnett, Michael Shannon, Wes Bentley, Lance Reddick. This is like, of course, obviously very male heavy, but like this is a crazy good cast. And the problem was, it seemed like a movie that the studio wanted to get out. I don't even know why they wanted to get it out so quickly, because it was sadly had a great cast working with a terrible script. From the script came from the screenwriters who wrote Crank, which, you know, that's a movie.
It does what it's doing spectacularly,
right?
But you have to commit to that thing 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is not
It's
that.
a lot of camp.
A lot of camp.
I really like Crank, actually, but it's just a lot of camp. And Jonah Hex obviously can carry some big set piece, weird situations, but camp is not on its surface the right way to go for Jonah Hex.
Yes. No. Wholeheartedly agree. And then the other piece of it was, bad script, and then an unexperienced live action director. So the guy who directed this, his name's Jimmy Hayward. He has done a lot of work in animation. He actually worked at Pixar for many years as an animator. He then directed Horton Hears a Who, Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who. And then, so all animation, Jonah Hex was his first live action film. And his only live action film, because he's not directed one since.
I do not understand directing animated films or live action films well enough to speak to this, but it does feel like those would be very different skill sets to me. Like, maybe I'm wrong. I am prepared to be told I'm wrong on that subject, that there's actually a lot more overlap than is obvious, but that feels like real different.
No, wholeheartedly agree. And it just seems like this is the studio picked people who they thought would get the job done under the timelines. It feels like a very studio executive-y movie. It's a shame. It's a shame because Jonah Hex, as we know,
we should still be
character.
talking about this movie.
Yes, absolutely.
And no one is talking about this movie.
No, I forget it exists sometime until I'm thinking about Jonah Hex. I was like, oh yeah, there was a movie. Oh boy, there was a movie, wasn't there? But yeah, so that's kind of the rundown of Jonah Hex and other media. You know, he's popped up a lot of cameos, but those are his major appearances to date.
And so here he shows up here, a little past his prime, apparently. Although I'm going to point out to you, I did a little math. The Civil War ended in 1865.
Okay.
This is 1883.
All right.
Let's assume that at his oldest, Jonah Hex was 25 when the Civil War ended.
Okay.
I don't know that his age is ever actually established in comic books. I haven't read them closely enough to know that. He usually sort of portrays older, but I think that has more to do with like the mileage rather than the years, as Indiana Jones would say it, right? Like the guy's had a rough time,
right?
You know?
Yeah, sure.
So let's, make him a little older as far as soldiers went for the Civil War and say he was 25 when it ended. And this is 18 years later.
So he's like barely in his 40s.
Right.
I mean, you kind of have to buy into that theory about the Indiana Jones. Like, man, you just lived a hard life.
Absolutely.
And by the time you're 40, you're looking like you're like 65.
Exactly. I think
the baldness and the gray hairedness. I was like, you're not just 40, you're like 60.
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, just interesting choices that if we're going to set it at a much later date so that he's old and over the hill, but you don't actually make him that old and over the hill. Again, it feels like something that should matter, but I can't quite put my finger on it. And again, this is a great episode with a lot of really amazing action going on. So
yes,
I don't want to think too hard about it.
No, and I don't think we're meant to. I don't think we're meant to overanalyze the timeline. I think this is a fun little adventure. Because you have Jonah Hex rolls into town, discovers he's looking for Duvall. By the way, Arcade Duvall, also voiced by Malcolm McDowell, Clockwork Orange fame.
He's really good. Like, he doesn't even have that much to do in this episode, considering he's who Jonah is after.
It's just a weird. I don't know. Maybe he probably was not as big a deal in the mid '90s as he is now. And I know he's not like a superstar now, but he's like an iconic cult figure. Yeah. So it just seems like a really big actor to have in such a small bit role. Honestly,
but Batman the Animated Series is clearly very famous for taking non-voice actors and using them in voice acting roles. That's how Kevin Conroy got the job. He's a stage actor,
right?
And then you have, one of my favorite unexpected pulls, Richard Mole as Two-Face. And then they get some actual voice actors in there too. I forget her name off the top of my head, but the voice actress that does Poison Ivy was a professional voice. They're just mixing and matching. And I can imagine that Andrea Romano was like, guys, look who we got for this bit part in the Western episode.
She did that all through her career, even going right down to the straight to DVD like movies that we've seen in the recent years. Like I remember Batman Year One when they casted Bryan Cranston as Lieutenant Gordon. Not an amazing movie, but I was like, that's a good casting choice.
I mean, let's talk about one of the only good things that happens in Batman and Harley Quinn as Paget Brewster as Poison Ivy.
Yes.
I mean, yeah. So thank you, Ms. Romano. We appreciate you.
And we miss you.
So this is also a very steampunk thing. Again, even before steampunk was, again, I don't want to say not a thing yet. I'm not an expert, but this would either have been.
It certainly was not as well known as it is today. And it's not that it's
concurrent at best, concurrent with its uprise. I mean, this is airships and
Wild Wild West doesn't come out into the late 90s. And listen, that movie's a total train wreck, but that was as I recall, that was the most popularized version of steampunk I had ever seen at the time.
And again, I mean, I don't want to get into the minutia necessarily, but it's honestly hard to even describe sci-fi westerns as steampunk, because steampunk is usually much more focused on that Victorian stuff, which is England, it's the UK, it's the Empire and what that means to them, and less so what it means to the West. It's a complicated bundle. In fact, if any listener is a total expert on steampunk, we would love to hear more from you. And if you wanted to record something that explained to us kind of the beginnings of steampunk and where the lines are, we would put that on a future episode. If anybody out there is an expert, send it to me. Hit me up on Twitter. My DMs are open. We will make that available.
Yeah, Joshua. So let's talk a little bit more about the way this is a genre mashup. It
Okay.
is a Western, it's a sci-fi, and it's a steampunk, and I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it provides a way for us to have crazy, wildly un-BTAS like set pieces, like grandiose set pieces. Like
we've seen a lot of blimps crash on Batman the Animated Series, but not like this.
Not ones with machine guns popping out the side, obliterating an entire town, by the way.
We've seen Batman in the desert, like crashing planes and stuff, but not like this.
No.
And I think it's worth saying that you could have come into this episode and been like, why am I watching an episode of Batman that doesn't have Batman in it? But I feel like almost everybody came out the other end going, it's fine. This was great. I love it. Thank you for this Jonah Hex episode of Batman.
I can't imagine someone being like, what the heck is this? Like, this is just, it's just so much fun. And I love that, like the scale, just like the moment when all of the cronies like parachute out of the plane, there's so many people.
There are so many of them.
This is huge. And then again, the stakes are actually pretty high. They're going to actually destroy this entire town with machine guns and bombs.
Well, and notice this is the Golden Spike being driven in. This is the final spike in the Transcontinental Railroad. Like this was both symbolically and literally the thing that was going to connect East and West in America. And Ra's is like, not today, friends. Not today. Today I ruin this and then I move east. The moment is right. Like the scale really is very big if you know a little bit of history.
I just love how they're able to use the framing device to say this is a Batman story, only to take us into a totally different genre mashup, basically a different show.
It's a different show.
Altogether.
This could have been a backdoor pilot for Jonah Hex.
Yes.
And if they hadn't immediately portrayed him as over the hill, I would almost wonder if that's what it was. But that doesn't seem like the right choice for a Jonah Hex show. And this is what I mean. This is what this show is. You and I dive into the details and try and figure out what was going on and why they matter. And I love it, but I can't suss it out. I do have one style thing when you talk about the airship that I found an amazing choice. Everybody on the airship looks like an 1880s sailor.
Yes, I thought so too. Wasn't that crazy? It's such a huge contrast.
Good choice, though.
I love it. Look at the contrast. Everyone's wearing Old West attire, which is already again BTAS. This is kind of weird.
It's already weird.
And you've got and then you've got of course your main key villains, Ra's al Ghul and Duvall wearing like the mustache twirling top hats and all that.
They look the most Victorian of anybody in the mayor, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
and
the
then
territorial governor.
Their cronies are sailors.
But I like this because first of all, Ra's has no connection to the American West, right? So if he's going to do something thematic, he's going to go, this is an airship. We are sailing in the air. There's rigging, right? Like, I don't know what the rigging does, but clearly rigging is a big important part of this. I need real sailors. And so he goes and gets actual stripe-wearing, shirtless, barefoot sailors to run his airship. There's actually kind of an amazing amount of world building right in that choice, that stylistic choice, and I like it.
Nice. Yes. I think it was a lot of fun. Just again, added to the kind of absurdity that we were seeing on screen. Like it all felt cohesive enough that it was like, this is all part of this weird alternate Western universe they've created for this episode. And it felt right. But at the same time, you're just like, this is an interesting choice, but it works.
Every single choice they make feels very deliberate, and it so all holds together that's why I'm really curious about these choices that seem weird. But because I love the sailors, I buy 100% into the sailors. But then I'm like, one black Union soldier? Okay, that's a choice.
That's a very weird choice.
You know, okay, Jonah's way over the hill. Okay, that's a choice. It makes me, all the details work so well together that when I go, wait, that one doesn't fit, but it still works, it makes me look closer at it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah. No, wholeheartedly agree. Well, Joshua, before we go into alternate media recommendations, I mean, would you consider this an essential watcher for Batman the Animated Series?
I'm really glad we've brought that question back. We kind of put that question on the shelf for a couple of weirdo episodes because I don't know if we were prepared to make a judgment on, Baby Doll. Is it a must watch? It's probably a should watch because it's so weird.
It's a curiosity.
Exactly. So I feel like Showdown could have fallen into that same curiosity crack, but the whole thing is so good. It's so good. Must watch.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. This is I would say this is an essential watcher. Yes, it's just as strange and weird. I didn't think like the Alfred episode, the last one we talked about the lion and the unicorn, right?
Yes.
I thought it was okay, and it was fun. I liked the espionage moments, but I don't think it was essential.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I liked it very much, but I probably would have fallen with, I think you should, but you don't have to.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
This one, I think you kind of have to. I think it's
great.
it's like that next level. Is it a Batman episode? No, not in any way. And it is a strange choice, but man, it's a fun time. It's a fun half an hour.
This is a show that has already really proven itself with versatility of storytelling, and this stretches that to the new uttermost, but they kill it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's an outlier, but that's why you should watch it.
All right, Joshua. So as always, we're going to go ahead and close out the conversation with some alternate media recommendations. I've got a few of my own. I want to see what you think. What are some things you recommend our listeners watch or listen to in addition to this episode?
Okay, so usually I only bring the one that gets to the heart of the matter. But I actually have a soft spot for weird Westerns. So I have a few. Okay. And we've mentioned one that's tied to one of my recommendations, but it's not itself my recommendation. Caleb mentioned there's a Wild Wild West movie, Will Smith in the starring role. Don't watch it.
It's terrible.
It's terrible, and it has not aged well.
It is
it's
very
sexist.
Yes.
It's gross. Don't watch it. I want it to be better. I want to tell you to watch it, but don't.
And on paper, it sounds like it should be fantastic.
Well, on paper, it sounds like it should be fantastic because it's based on an old show that was actually fantastic.
Oh, go on.
During the kind of spy craze that came out after James Bond, right? You got Man from U.N.C.L.E. in America. You got Danger Man, the Avengers in the UK. And then...
Not those Avengers.
Yeah, the British Avengers. You've definitely heard me mention them on this show before.
Oh, yes.
But one kind of weird genre mashup, because remember, this is the 60s on television. We didn't do weird genre mashups, but somebody said, what if there was James Bond in the Old West? And you got the show, Wild Wild West, that became this movie. It's amazing. It's really good. It's still a TV show from the 60s, so I'm not going to suggest to you that it is devoid of its own issues, but it's very, very good. And me being aware of Wild Wild West is why I was so excited for another series that is concurrent with this episode of Batman the Animated Series, The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. Bruce Campbell is the titular Briscoe County Jr., who is having Wild West adventures as a lawman and a bounty hunter that also happen to involve weird alien technology.
How have I never heard of or seen this show?
It
wow.
did not last very long because it was on Fox.
Oh, yeah.
We may have gotten 2 whole seasons, but which I watched avidly, like when it was coming out, and then it vanished. And of course, this is so long ago. That was it. I have no other options. When I was in college, they would do Sunday morning double feature episodes of Wild Wild West and Briscoe County Jr. And I reined my Saturday night activities in so that I could get up the next morning in order to watch these shows back to back. So highly recommend both Wild Wild West and Briscoe County Jr. Now, my last one is exceedingly self-serving, but I will do it anyway.
Do it.
Because those of you listening to this show know that I'm a podcaster and I talk about superheroes a lot, but you may not know that I am also a writer of fiction and I have written a weird Western.
Oh?
Yes, I wrote a book called Hellbent for Leather. It is a full-length weird Western novel about a cowboy who can see the dead and demons, and his best friend is an idiot who sold his soul to the devil, and
as idiots tend to do,
and our main character must go save his friend's soul from the devil. So Hellbent for Leather by yours truly, Joshua Unruh. Check it out in finer online bookstores.
And by using promo code Joshua Unruh, you get 30% off. No, I'm sorry.
Don't do that. Amazon will not pay attention to that. Don't do it.
I'm sorry. I had
but
to put
if
that in
that
there.
does sound interesting, do check the show notes. I'll put a link to Hellbent for Leather in the show notes. And if you like it, or if you hate it, reach out to me and let me know. I'd be interested to know what my listeners think about my fiction.
Please do check it out. Highly recommend all of Joshua's writing. So, Joshua, I've also got 3. These are a little more sporadic because I was having a hard time. I was looking at weird Westerns, and I saw a few, but not as many as I loved. But I will start with one that is as on the nose as I can get. It's very recent, and it's very gory. It's like extremely gory. It's a little film called Bone Tomahawk.
Yes.
It is about these investigators who are investigating murders. It turns out there's some supernatural shenanigans going on.
Absolutely.
And the thing about it is they play it pretty straight for like a Western. They play it straight.
Yeah.
Very serious, but then the horror elements feel extremely horrific. It plays everything really straight, and guys, it is so gory. But I mean, even with even though when you get the vibe, okay, something supernatural is going on, you're still guessing at like what exactly is going on, and where is this actually going to play out at? And it is I think a great execution of a weird Western played straight, not for camp or for silliness.
I really think you can absolutely do a campy weird Western. That is a thing. I mean, Briscoe County Jr. is honestly that. Other than the fact that it's a little more steampunk than the supernatural stuff. But I think that the real interesting bits of that genre are the fact that you play both completely straight.
Yep.
It is a horror that just happens to be going on with a bunch of outlaws and lawmen and gamblers and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I'd be daft if I did not mention that the featured character, firstly, this whole cast is amazing, but I'm just going to start by saying, if you weren't already on board with the idea, starring Kurt Russell.
It's so good.
Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox, Richard Jenkins, David Arquette. I mean, they pull out a lot of goodies in here. Again, something I've noticed is Westerns like this tend to be very male heavy, unfortunately. But so there's not a lot of great actresses I can speak to. However, I will say, top-notch cast, super strong direction, and highly recommend that film. Next recommendation is going to get a little weirder. So kind of going along the lines of this like weird sort of futuristic steampunk technology. I think Atlantis: The Lost Empire, the Disney animated movie, is a good recommend. That's one I also need to revisit because I have a feeling it's way more problematic than I remember. But as I recall, I really love the way that utilizes maybe not steampunk technology quite, but the way that you have a genre mashup of these like very strong sci-fi elements on the backdrop of this like early 20s explorer adventure film.
Designed by one of my favorite comic book artists, Mike Mignola of Hellboy fame.
Ooh, that explains so much. Actually,
I mean, it doesn't really look like him because it goes through kind of the Disney animation style. But once you know that, there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't unsee.
And also, even for Disney, it looks extremely distinctive compared to all the other Disney stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. And I want to say that was one of the last 2D Disney animated films before they went to 3D. They came back with The Princess and the Frog, and it didn't pan out, so they went back to 3D. So I think I would say, again, probably more problematic than I remember, but as I recall, the animation and I love the animation and the genre mashups, definitely worth revisiting. And also, last but not least, another genre mashup that I love, BioShock Infinite, which is plays way more into the steampunk Western era. So it's the early 1900s, so it's like 1912, I think, is when it's set. So there's still, it's a little more futuristic than where we're at in this episode, but there's still like some wild Western, like the Western developments, the railroads, and like the fashion is very similar. And you have all these like weird late 1800s, early 1900s fashion set in the city in the sky. So there's blimps everywhere, and it's just a super fun adventure that really just throws a bunch of genres together and tells a really compelling story about the nature of finding redemption, which is another very Western theme. So
no, you can really get into the early 1900s and still get away with like kind of the last gasp of the Old West.
Yes.
I mean, that's basically Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch.
Yes.
You know, well, we were Old West outlaws. Now we're aging our way out. What the hell are we supposed to do with ourselves?
Exactly.
Yeah. You can get some good mileage in there and throw some steampunk and some weird stuff in there. It's fine. I'd read it.
Play it. Great game on PS4, PC, Xbox One, all that good stuff.
Well, that about wraps up this animated discussion. Caleb, where can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Well, Joshua, you can always find me on Twitter talking about film, television, video games, and all sorts of other pop culture goodness at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk. I'm also the editor-in-chief and film critic at the Cinematropolis, and we publish these in-depth essays on all types of different films, oftentimes including science fiction and superhero films, all the stuff you'd want to read about. And you can find all these articles at thecinematropolis.com. Joshua, what about you?
I'm also most active on Twitter, where you can find me easily enough at Joshua Unruh. And remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/Pulp Diction Productions.
In our next episode, we'll be discussing Season 2, Episode 14, Riddler's Reform.
Until next time, we'll see you back here. Same bat time, same bat channel.